This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, Rabbi Sai. As we prepare for Shabbos Parshas Behar, we're looking into this inyan of the Ramban's understanding of Luchos Rishonos as opposed to Luchos Shnios. And I was surprised to learn many fundamental things about Torah that I was not even aware of. It's very powerful. You know, you learn, and then you learn something that not just you didn't know before, but something it's so basic that you see how little we really know. But the Ramban in Parshas Behar has a very important understanding of Luchos Rishonos as opposed to Luchos Shnios. What exactly was the transition? What exactly was the difference? What changed? What was added? Very basic, very important. Let us see the Ramban in the beginning of this week's Parsha. The beginning of the Parsha tells us how Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai, and Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu the details of the laws of Shemitah. Now, has Shemitah ever been mentioned before? And certainly not at great length. This is the first time the Torah is giving us the details of Shemitah. Well, there's a brief reference to Shemitah, Vashvias Tishmetena Unatashta, but there are no details given. And there is some kind of connection between Har Sinai and the laws of Shemitah. And this week's Parsha, when it talks about Hashem spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai, is referring to the first Luchos, is referring to the second Luchos. Doesn't specify, doesn't make clear. Well, chronologically it's after Parshas Kisisa, and therefore it is, would seem, based on the order of things, that it was the Luchos Shnios. However, the Ibn Ezra learns that it was actually going back in Muktam U'Muchar B'Torah, and it's going back to the original giving of the Torah on Har Sinai. But the Ramban always likes to learn that Muktam U'Muchar B'Torah, there is a chronology in the Torah. And therefore, if there is chronology of the Torah, why is the Torah specifically giving us the details of Shemitah the second time around and not the first time around?
So everything after Mishpatim was given after the second Luchos.
According to Ramban, I don't know about everything, but in general, that is the Ramban's approach. Look at number 1.
So according to the Ramban,
too soon to ask. Why should
yeah, well, we didn't say anything yet. Let's see, Rabbi, so we have 3 pages to do very important stuff. So let's try to hold off, okay? Let's look at number 1. The Ramban says like this. Ulefi daiti, ki nichteva kan b'seder nachan. Really, the Torah wrote it in a very nice order. Ki perush b'Har Sinai. When the Parsha begins b'Har Sinai, it's referring to ba'alois Hashem l'kabel Luchos Shnios, when Moshe went up there to get the second Luchos. Ubir ha'inyan. Ki betchilas arbaim yom harishonim shaluchos rishonos kasav Moshe b'sefer habris eskol divrei Hashem ve'eskol hamishpatim hane'amarim sham. When Moshe went up the first time, he wrote the whole sefer habris, and he wrote all the halachos. But if you remember, the first time Moshe went up to Har Sinai in Yisrael in Mishpatim, the deal that they made was they shechted karbanos. They used half of the blood to sprinkle on the Mizbeach and the half of the blood to sprinkle on the people. When uchshechatu be'ego, when the Jews sinned with the ego, v'nishtabru haluchos, ki'ilu nisbatla habris hahi etzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is as if the deal was off. All bets are off. We're finished. Get out of here. We're finished. Uchshenisratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe b'luchos shnios, when Moshe got Ribbon Shalom to be appeased, Tzivahu bebris chadasha, they made a new covenant. Shenemar, Hineya noichi kares bris, vehechzer sham hamitzvos hachamuros, and he repeated the strict mitzvahs shenemru b'seder ve'ela mishpatim bebris rishayna. So out of all the mitzvahs that were mentioned in mishpatim, the Ribbon Shalom repeated the strict ones. For example, Shemitah. Shemitah was repeated and was said in Mishpatim, Shvius Tishmetena Natasha, and because Shvius is very strict, we'll see what's so strict about it. Therefore, it's repeated again in Parshas Behar. Okay, so in the Sefer Sam Derech was from Reb Simcha Ziso Broida, the Rashiva of Chevron, And he really has a very critical analysis on the Rambans. It's a sefer on Chumash, primarily on the Ramban, and he mines the Ramban. I mean, he just plucks nugget after nugget after nugget from the Rambans, but like major principles. Now, I conveniently glassed over all the main things that we could glean from this Ramban to be able to draw your attention to it. And that is, says the Sefer Samderach, at first glance, when the Ramban says, when the Jews sinned by the Egel and the Luchos were broken, the bris was batel by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem, when he was appeased, they made a new covenant. That appears that by the Chet HaEgel, all bets were off. So if that's the case, he asks a very basic question, and that is, we're about to celebrate the Yom Tov of Shavuos. The problem is, wrong day. Yeah, wrong day. The Luchos Rishonos which we got on Shavuos were broken. They were nullified. The bret was off. The bris was off. The covenant was off, and we had to make a new covenant. And we got the second Luchos on Yom Kippur. So what are we doing celebrating Shavuos? We should celebrate Yom Kippur. Shavuos is off. Is cancelled. Is nullified. That's the question. And the answer is, Ramban himself says the answer. We just conveniently glossed over it, and I'll draw your attention to the key words soon. Okay. The Ramban continues. Number 3 is a continuation of the Ramban. The Ramban says that the second time around, God wanted to make the deal more binding. What's next week's Parsha? B'chukaisa. What's in B'chukaisa? The Teichacha. I never realized this. The Teichacha was when Hashem saw the first deal was not strong enough, Rebbeinu Shalom needed to emphasize it and give it chizuk and give it power through the klalos. When the first time Klal Yisrael got the Torah, you know what they said? Na'aseh v'nishar. Yeah, we love it. But God says, very nice, you love it, but that doesn't work. That doesn't work, obviously. So we gotta, up the ante over here. And that's where B'chukaisai is dafka by Luchos Shnias and not by Luchos Rishonos. Okay? I never realized that. Okay? That just to know, the Yisodos HaTorah, B'chukaisai is after Kisisa, but not, B'chukaisai has nothing to do with Yisrael. Had it just been for Yisrael, we never would have had B'chukaisai. Okay.
So what happens when you breach the contract?
Exactly. That's exactly what's going on. So you're going to be you're a contractual expert, so maybe you'll appreciate this, or maybe not. But listen to what he says. God wanted to up the ante. Now, it's the same deal with added incentives and added repercussions. Al kol ha-mitzvos rishonos v'al kol ha-mishpatim. Okay? Ulefikach amar bekan. That's why here, the second time, b'soif ha-teichachos, at the end of the teichacha, next week's parsha, Eila ha-chukim ha-mishpatim ha-toros asher nosan Hashem beinoi uvein b'nei Yisrael b'har Sinai b'yad Moshe. It doesn't say asher tziva Hashem, because God is not commanding again. The commandment was given. All what's happening now is the repercussions are being added. That's a remez to all the mitzvahs that were given the first time around. Look by the dot. V'nei b'sefer ha-bris ha-rishayin. The first time around, Nemra hashviyas b'chlal. It says Shemitah in general. What does it say? V'hashviyas tishmetena u'ntasha. But v'yata b'bris hazois hashenis nemra b'pratev v'diktukev v'oinsheha. Now God says it's not enough to give it to you generally. In other words, the first time around, God just, the generalities were given. Now He needs to show the details, the minutiae. Ubeis habris harishayna shehu ba'arba'am yom rishaynim. Now the question is, so why did Moshe tell this to them immediately upon coming down with the Luchos Shniyos? The answer is, well, he didn't have time. He didn't have time. Why? Moshe was commanded about the Mishkan the first time around. And when Hashem was Nisratza, and He commanded them to make another bris, Moshe went down, and He told them to make the Mishkan, and He gathered Bnei Yisrael, and He told them about the Meleches HaMishkan, and the Jews accepted it b'simcha, and they gave their donations, and they made the Mishkan. And when it was erected, Moshe called them to the Oyel Moed, and he commanded them about all the karbanos.
But when did he tell them about the restrictions? And when did they say not something?
And then,
Second.
okay, we'll see. Okay, hold on to that question. Remember that question. Did the Jews say Nasa v'nishma to the second time around?
The details.
So the Ramban was going to explain that. Now, when? So in other words, even though the second time around Hashem was giving added emphasis, giving more emphasis on the details, giving more punishment and more klalos, nevertheless, why didn't Moshe tell to them in Kisisa? Because he had to come down and tell them about the Mishkan. As soon as he told them about the Mishkan, they went to build the Mishkan. It took time to build the Mishkan. And then Moshe had to tell them once the Mishkan was standing about all the karbanos. And after that, Moshe said, by the way, I have to remind you that when Hashem called me back the second time, he gave me details specifically of Shemitah and Yovel, and he told me about the Einshim, and now Moshe is the first time he has a chance to tell them about the Einshim. So says the Samdach, what do we see from here?
We're about to travel now, right?
That by the Luchos Rishonais, Moshe was given the generalities, and by Luchos Shniyos he was given the details. So we have to explain this.
But he was given the generalities again as well.
Yes, right. Why now, the second time around, is he being given the specifics? Okay?
She didn't have time.
Rabbi said, let's continue. The Ramban. Let's continue. Look at number 5. The Ramban continues. Why, though? The second time around, there were differences in the procedures. Number 1, they didn't bring karbanos. They didn't sprinkle the blood on them and on the Mizbeach.
How do we know they were?
We know they did it in Mishpatim the first time around. We don't find they did it the second time around. Why? They didn't have to bring karbanos. But now the Ramban doesn't say why. He just says they didn't have to. Why not? Why didn't they have to? But he says what they did have to do was they had to accept the first bris ba'alo v'klala. Now look at the words of the Ramban. V'zeh tam on the third line in number 5. Asher nosan Hashem beino yiveim b'nei Yisrael Behar Sinai. This is the meaning of Hashem gave between him and between the Bnei Yisrael. Ki hu hanoisin lahem b'vris hazois. He's the one making this bris. Ki mocha lohem al pi hatnam ha'elu. He was moichel them based on certain stipulations. So what is he trying to say? God is the one giving this second bris. What do you mean God is the one? Of course He's the one. Aren't there 2 parties? What do you mean God is the one? It almost seems like the second time around there's only one party. And second. And then the Ramban ends off, the MS Amru, and God is adding that one of the Tnaim are that the Jews keep the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. So says the Samdach, what do we glean from the Ramban? That the first bris was different than the second one. The first bris was Zrikas Hadam, Hakravas Karbanos. No Zrikas Hadam, no bringing Karbanos the second time around. The second time around, even though there were no Karbanos, there were Klolos that they accepted. They accepted curses, they accepted Olos, they accepted the Teichachab, not the first time around. So the question we have to understand is, why the first time around did they make Karbanos? Did they make Zrikas Hadam? The second time around they didn't make Karbanos, they didn't make Zrikas Hadam, and they accepted Olos and Klolos. And what did the Ramban mean? Look in number 3. The Ramban starts off, God wanted to be machmir on them the second time around. Why did He want to be machmir on them?
But they sinned.
Well, okay.
But then then at that point He added things. Whatever happened in the first Luchos was still standing, except now He's adding stringency, sort of.
He's adding punishments. He's adding klalos. So
That's
what
why
exactly
was
the first deal off?
No, first it was a deposit.
Was
The
the
second deal was they closed the deal. Just like when you're having a contract to buy a house. You go, you put down a deposit, you have a
well, you can't add
You can't say that.
if the first deal is on, then you can't add a stipulation to the first deal.
Right, the first deal would have said, but I have details to come.
Why
But he didn't say the first time around any details. You
Why
can't
can't-
because the deal is the deal. Now you want to change the deal?
And why can't you add a stipulation?
Can you?
Sure.
Of course you can.
Well, then the
There's
first
details to follow.
Right.
And he changed some.
Well, then if you need to add a stipulation, do you need to make a new deal?
He changed some of the wording.
No.
Changed some of the wording.
Another difference between Luchos Rishonos and Luchos Shniyos, okay? And that is, by Luchos Shniyos, Hashem tells Moshe, V'ish lo ya'aleh imach, v'gam ish al yira v'chol ha'har. So first of all, V'ish lo ya'aleh imach, that's fine, that's like the first one. V'gam ish al yira v'chol ha'har. There are a lot of Jews who they accompanied Moshe part of the way there, right? The Zakanim, Yoshua, they went up a little bit. The first time around, people went up, but this time the ish lo yala imach. No one could go with you. No one could go with Moshe. Shelo yala imcha klal ziknei Yisrael kasher aser Luchos Rishonos. No one could go with you. By Luchos Rishonos, the Zakanim went. Luchos Shniyos, the Zakanim didn't go. The whole mountain, nobody could go. By the first time, the Jews were on the foot of the mountain, and this time nobody's near the mountain. The first time, it said Lo siga bayad. You can't touch the mountain, but near the mountain, the cows could graze. This time, Gam atzoin v'habakor al yeru, not al hahor hahu. El Muhahorahu, not even in the vicinity. Why is it the first time around, Zakanim go up, Aaron goes up, Bnei Yisrael goes to the foot of the mountain, and the animals are around, and this time no one goes near the mountain, and the animals can't even go in the vicinity? Says Mineged. The answer is, listen to this, Ki barishonos lo yhuzaru rak shelo yisiga bayad MMH.
And you went to number 7?
V'nei adayin hayu oimdim b'azhar ahi. The first restrictions were still on. Ki hakavod hayatamid Behar ad shenasnu haluchos ha'achraynos. But why is God being? So not only is God being machmir with them with klalos and alos, God is saying nobody could go to the foot of the mountain. No Zakanim could go up. Aaron can't go up, and the animals can't even be in the vicinity. Why? Listen to this. The first time around, the giving of the Torah was for the Jewish people. For the Jewish people, they could go up a little bit. The Zakanim could go up, the Yisrael could go to the foot of the mountain, and the animals could be in the vicinity. Bezeh leMoshe belvad. The second Luchos were only for Moshe. Bezechusai in his merit, uvitfilasai. Now who's greater? Klal Yisrael, collectively, or Moshe? Moshe is greater. And therefore, the first time around, there were less restrictions. But the second time around, where it's for only Moshe, Moshe brings more Shechina, you got to stay further back. Okay? Rabbi said, you don't want to miss this. This is mamish fundamentals of Judaism. Begadol yiyeh hakavod hanigla elahar ha'achron min harishan. There was more honor on the second time around than the first time around. So the first time around, Zakanim could go up, Aaron could go up, Jews could go to the foot, then the animals could go up to the perimeter. Second time around, the Torah was not for Klal Yisrael, it was only for Moshe. We'll see, what was that supposed to mean?
So we don't have to keep it.
We'll see. And the second time around, because it wasn't for Klal Yisrael, it was for Moshe, and because of Moshe, more Shechina came, and therefore there were more restrictions. Rabbi Sai, now we understand, in Parshas Kisisa, Moshe comes down from Luchos Shniyos. What does he look like? There was something outstanding about his appearance. His face emanated beams of light. Why did his face emanate beams of light? Dafka the second time and not the first time. The answer is the first time the concentration of Shechina was less, because it was in the Luchos of Klal Yisrael, and everyone was allowed to go up a little bit. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu did not experience the same elevated status. His face wasn't shining. The second time around, where there was more Hashras HaShechina, and there were more restrictions on the people, that elevated Moshe even greater, and that's why his face was shining more the second time and not the first time. The Ramban holds. Okay? This is what we glean from the Ramban. But now listen carefully. What does it mean the second time was for Moshe as opposed to the first time that was for Klal Yisrael. This is a Nakuda that I didn't know. Listen to what he says. The Ramban, later in Kisisa, he says like this. Why doesn't it say by the second time around, Rabbi Yosef Kasha, Nasa v'nishma? Did the Jews accept it the second time around?
The Jews. It was from Moshe.
Did the Jews accept it?
It wasn't given to the Jews.
It wasn't given
yet.
to them. Okay, good. So the Ramban first starts by saying, when Hashem told Moshe, Ksav l'chas hadvar ma'ela, Tziva sheyichtav sefer bris v'yikra oisei ba'oznei, he commanded them to write the book of the bris and read it in the ears of the people. And they would accept it b'nasa v'nishma like the first time. Says Ramban, whatever was the first time, he wanted to repeat the second time. And there's no question that the Jews accepted it the second time. So why doesn't the Torah say it? Because not everything that happens one time does have to repeat a second time. In other words, it's Torah, divrei Torah, aniyim b'makam acher, v'ashirim b'makam acher. In other words, it happened, but the Torah did not concern itself to write again that the Jews did so. However, this is not the Ramban's preferred pshat. I'm going to tell you very soon what the Ramban's preferred pshat is. Let's go to the Gemara Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara says that the Jews by Matan Torah, they stood under the mountain. Vayisatzu v'tachta Sahara, Amar Rav Avdimi, Barchama, Barchasa, Melamed shekafa Kadosh Baruch Hu aleim esahar kegigis. God suspended the mountain over their heads like a barrel. V'yamar lahem.
Second time.
First time. That's the pasuk in Yisrael. So Gemara says, if God forced us into it, so then we have an escape hatch. We didn't have to keep the Torah because God stuffed it down our throats. So the Gemara, you're right. But in the times of Purim, we accepted it willingly, and then it's binding. As Tosfos, what do you mean the Torah was not binding? But the Gemara says in Nedarim that Moshe made a bris in Klal Yisrael on the Torah and the mitzvahs, and he made them take a shvuah at Har Grizim and Har Eval.
That wasn't Torah Shebel Peh. We learned
that. When was that? That's in Parshas Atam Nitzavim. So there, God didn't suspend the mountain over our throat, over our head. So Tosfos says, well, God told us to do it, so it's like against our will. We didn't accept it willingly. So the question is, why is Tosfos only asking from the covenant of Har Grizim and Har Eval, which was Ba'arvos Moav? What about the covenant in next week's Parsha with the Teichacha? Why didn't Tosfos ask in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Behar, God, the Luchos is also a second covenant, Ba'ala Uveshvua. Why is Tosfos only asking that? Whoa, what about the Jews had to accept the Torah in Arvos Moav? What about the second time around? There's a extraneous object. Yeah. So Rabbi say, why is Tosfos only asking from the bris of Har Grizim and Har Eval? Why does he not ask from the bris of Luchos? Look at number 14. Here's the key. You know why God did not? You know why the Torah doesn't tell us that Klal Yisrael said Nasa v'nishma to Luchos? Because they didn't say Nasa v'nishma to Luchos. Why? Listen to this. The Hanochin Be'enai, look at number 14, says Ramban. Ki ba'avur she'Yisrael hem ha'choitim, because the Jews are the sinners. Rabbi say, you gotta know this. Nobody's walking out of here unless they know this. Ready? Otherwise, you want to keep your yarmulke on, you gotta know this. We're threatening you. Ba'ala uveshvua. Yeah? Listen to this. Haim, the Jews, the first time around the covenant, who reneged? Who violated the terms?
Only a few Jews.
The Jews, not God, the Jews. God had to make a new covenant. Hu lahem brisai. So that God does not break the covenant. So he said to Moshe, Moshe, you write the new stipulations. And this is what it means. And this is what it means, itcha, because it's because of you. but they don't have to do anything. God has to make a new bris. The Klal Yisrael does not need a new bris. God needs a new bris. So 1 second.
You need a new bris.
No, 1 second. Time out. 1 second. The Ramban says, going back to number 1, on the 4th line, Uchshachatu ba'egel v'neshtabra haluchos kilo nisbadla habris hahi eitzel hakadosh baruch hu. When the Jews sinned, the bris was abrogated to God, but not to the Jews. Says the Ramban, halachic contracts work the following way. When you make a treaty with two people, and one party does not keep the terms of the contract, he is still bound by the contract. The other party has the right to withdraw. That's how treaties work.
And here the mountain was on top
One second. Let's digest that. When you make a deal, when you make a treaty, if party A violates the terms of the treaty, party A can't say, well, I broke the terms, so I'm not bound. Of course you're bound. You're still bound. You were the one who broke it. The other party has the right to retract, says Ramban. And therefore, very clearly Ramban is saying, when the Jews sinned with the Egel, the Torah was given, the Jews were still bound by the Torah. It's God who had the right to renege. And that is why, the second time around, all that has to happen is, God has to bind himself. He doesn't have to bind the Jews. The Jews are bound. If we were to ask, when was the Torah given? Shavuos. Shavuos was the Torah for us. And which Torah are we bound to? Vav Sivan. The problem is we broke the agreement. God had the ability to renege. When did God fortify his commitment to the treaty? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur got nothing to do with us. Yom Kippur is God's giving of the Torah. Our giving of the Torah, we're finished on Shavuos. It's when we sinned with the Egel, it was Nisbat la habris hahi eitzel hakadosh baruch hu, not eitzel Yisrael. When did the Jews say Nasa v'nishma? The first time. What about the second time? Nobody asked them. Nobody cares. We don't care what the Jews said the second time. Yeah, the Ramban suggests in the first time they probably said it and the Torah doesn't report. But in number 14, the Ramban says, V'hanochayin be'enai, is that since the second time around, the Jews were the one who broke the treaty, Hashem needs to be mechadish the bris chadasha. Look at the words he says. Shalai yafer hu lahem brisai. Very important words. Very important words. You got to know this if you're Jewish. If you're not Jewish, you don't have to know this. But if you're a Jew, you got to understand what's Luchos Rishonos and Luchos Shniyos. Luchos Rishonos, it was a treaty. And what was the treaty? Through Zrikas Hadam, through Karbanos. So now the question is, why didn't they do Zrikas Hadam and Karbanos the second time? The Jews don't have to do anything the second time. In terms of them, they don't have to do anything. The treaty was made, they're still bound by it. It's God who has the ability to renege. God wanted to renege. So he says, listen, Moshe, the second time around, I don't have to get their agreement, because their agreement is still binding. I have to be willing to rededicate myself to the terms of the treaty. Therefore, I don't need the Jews. All I need is you.
How do we know Hashem didn't renege the first time around? He told Moshe, I'll destroy them.
Because he says, Hinei Anochi, but Moshe davened, and Hashem said, Hinei Anochi, Itcha. Itcha means because of you. No, because of you, I'm willing to rededicate myself to the terms of the original treaty. Not I'm making a new treaty with you. Moshe never brought any karbanos. No blood was sprinkled on Moshe. The treaty was made the first time around. God has the ability to renege. And why didn't he renege? That's through Parshas B'chukaisai. He had Moshe say, look, Moshe, I could renege, but I'm not willing to put my chips in with the treaty until you up the ante. You're going to be the Unterführer. You're going to be the Sheshvinon. You write new terms. What are the new terms? Parshas B'chukaisai are the new terms of the agreement. Why didn't Tosfos ask, well, the Jews also accepted the Torah in Parshas B'chukaisai? The answer is they didn't accept the Torah there. They had already accepted the Torah before. B'chukaisai is just Moshe rewriting the new terms of the agreement. That's why the Ramban, and look back in the first piece on this week's Parsha, he says, Uchshechatu b'yegel v'nishtabru haluchos. Not nisbatla habris. Gotta look at the words. Keilu nisbatla habris. It's as if the bris was broken. Keilu. Why? As if? Because to the Jews it was on. To God he had the ability to renege. So says the Sefer Sam Derech. Now the second time around, they weren't giving Torah. It was just Moshe Rabbeinu was acting as the attorney, or the mediator, the Unterführer, the Sheshvinan. So it's only him and God. There's much more concentrated Shechina. Nobody could go anywhere near the mountain. So there are two dimensions of it. No one could go anywhere near the mountain. First of all, they're not needed. What do we need the Jews for? They're already bound. I'm finished with them, God says. The Jews, to them, Aaron, Zakanim, the cows, they stay out. You already did what you had to do. And because of that, because only Moshe was needed, that brought more Shechina. That was greater Hisgalos, and therefore Moshe had Karnei Hoid. I mean, this is a whole completely different understanding of Torah. The whole giving of the Torah, Luchos Rishonos, Luchos Shniyos. And what I want to point out is...
Then why do we have to have Kiblu by Purim? I mean, if we already were bound and didn't have the right to...
We're bound by a forced agreement. That's the only thing. The only thing...
No, but obviously still a good agreement.
It's
still a good agreement.
It's good in terms of...
Baruch didn't need...
No, it's good in terms of the fact that we broke it doesn't mean it's off. But the whole dimension of, the whole level of it is, it only has the force of a forced agreement. The forced agreement is only so strong. So Rabbi say what we're emphasizing is a few key statements in the Ramban. In number 1, the Ramban in this week's Parsha number 5, he says, Ki'ilu nisbat la habris hahi eitzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The bris was only broken by God. Okay, you got that? That's a key understanding. It was only to Ribbon Shalom that was broken. And that is why the Ramban says, in number 3, God wanted to up the ante through the alos and klalos, but karbanos were not necessary. In number 5, the Ramban says karbanos were not necessary. In number 10, the Ramban starts off by saying that really Klal Yisrael did say Nasa v'nishma, but his preferred understanding in number 14 is it's really irrelevant what the Jews' reaction was, because there was no new giving of the Torah. The Torah was given. Now it's just God committing himself. It's not the Jews committing themselves, it's God committing himself. So he says, Rabbi Say, look at number 18. Umayata bar, we'll move on. Now we understand. Madua mitzaynim es kabbalas haTorah b'shvuos. Zman matan haluchos harishayim v'loy b'yom ha'kippurim. Zman matan haluchos hashniyim. Now we understand very simply why we celebrate Shavuos and not Yom Kippur. Dila mavuar. Kabbalas haTorah achen hoisa b'matan haluchos rishonim v'loy nizbatla. It was given on Shavuos. It was not batal. You're going to ask me this doesn't work. But this year we had 5 years ago, and this year we had 3 years ago. This is the Ramban. This is the Ramban. Uvamatan haluchos hashniyim rak chuska hakabal luchos rishonos begeder chuppah v'nesuin. And now we understand why Tosfos does not invoke the fact that the Jews accepted the Torah again by luchos shniyos. They didn't accept the Torah again. They were pretty much an irrelevant party.
They didn't accept the detail. Right? I mean, if you
the detail, in other words, the details were given.
Very significant.
The details were given the first time around. It's just the emphasis on teaching them clearly was more emphatic the second time around.
So we told it was only generalities the first time around.
That's what was said, but you can't say there was not a new revelation of Torah the second time around.
It was my question. It sounds like that
it was the emphasis on details that was important to Rebbeinu Shalom. It was the emphasis. All the punishments are mechukah. There are no einshim until then.
So
why?
I'm going to negotiate with you the contract, but all the repercussions of breaching the contract aren't given until later. You don't need another exception.
Well, they said nasa v'nishma. Rebbeinu Shalom felt that would have been enough had they not sinned. Rabbi say, this is what it means. The luchos shniyos were given only to Moshe. What does it mean only to Moshe? Because it was not a new giving of the Torah. You say, only Moshe has to keep it. No, we have to keep it from the first time around. It was the Luchos Shniyos were the upped repercussions for Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the meaning of the Gemara Nedarim, that Leinitna Torah ela l'Moshe lazarei. The Gemara Nedarim says, on Daf Lameches, Moshe, the Torah was only given to Moshe. What is that supposed to mean? In other words, this Moshe Rabbeinu was hired as the mediator, the attorney for Klal Yisrael to write new Tanaim.
He represented.
Okay. Now the question is, but of all the details that were emphasized the second time around, which detail does the Torah make mention of in this week's Parsha? Shemitah. So the question is, why Dafka are the terms of the agreement specifically upheld with the details of Shemitah more than any other mitzvah? And that we have to see the Ramban also in this week's Parsha. Look at number 20. The Ramban says like this. The Ramban says,
Shabbos L'Hashem, L'Shem, L'Shem.
What about from the last week's Parsha? There were a lot of new mitzvahs.
one second please. He says, Shemitah is v'tam Shabbos Hashem ki yom HaShabbos v'soid yemois olam ramos l'makam hazeh. He says, v'kof oznecha, incline your ear, l'shmaya mashani rashoy lahashmiacha, to listen to what I want to tell you. And that is, he tells us that Shemitah is, and the Shabbos of the 7th year is a remez to the Mizmar Shir la'asad lavai. It's a year of, it's like olam haba. And the days are a remez to the Ma'aseh Bereshis. Now look, he says like this. Because Shemitah is so fundamental to Brias Ha'olam, he says, Al ken hichmer akasav b'Shmitah yoiser mikol chayavei lavin v'chayav golos aleh. More than any other lav in the Torah is machmer by Shemitah. Shemitah is the most chumor lav in the Torah. So lav she'ein by kares, right? It's, of all the lavin, that there's no death penalty, Shemitah is the most chamor, and the punishment is galus. Why? He says, look down a little bit, like the pasuk says, Kamoy shehichmer ba'arayas shenemar os tirtza ha'aretz es Shabbos soseha. Then the land will take revenge and be appeased for the lack of Shemitah observance. V'hechzer ha'inyan pamir rabbis. V'nemar v'ha'aretz teyaziv mehem ba'tiratz es Shabbos soseha. Like the Mishnah says in Avos, Golos Baal Inoi Hadin, and on Shemitah Haaretz. Why? Shekal HaKoifer Ba Eino Moide B'Masa Bereshis of Olam Haba. Shemitah, the 7-year cycle, the 6 years of work and the 7th year of rest, reflects on the 6 days of creation and the 7th day of resting from creating the world. So Shemitah, Shmisoda Shabbos, but of all the lavin, Shabbos was perhaps given already in detail in the beginning. Maybe that's very basic. But Shemitah specifically, he says, Ramban, Kol HaKoifer Ba Eino Moide B'Masa Bereshis of Olam Haba. Anyone who denies Shemitah does not believe in creation, does not believe in the world to come. So of all the mitzvahs in the Torah, God used Shemitah as the linchpin, together with all the klalos of next week's Parsha, to uphold the terms of the agreement. So in other words, what's very interesting is, what binds God to keep us as a people? Right? We're bound from the beginning. Just because we broke the agreement, we're still bound. What binds God? God uses Shemitah, that binds Him to take care of us. So it's our observance of Shemitah is what binds God. So that's a very powerful concept when you think about it. In other words, what holds Rabban Shalom responsible to keep his end of the deal? It's only the Shemitah observance. That's what the Rabban Shalom selected to bind him. So what we're learning is Parshas Behar and Parshas Chumash. It's not a new bris. It's not a new covenant. The covenant was there the whole time. The giving of the Torah was from Luchos Rishonos. Luchos Shniyos was, since we broke the agreement, God could back out. And it's through the Chumash and through Shemitah that God is now bound again. And therefore, when Moshe went up, he only went up for himself, not for Klal Yisrael. That's why it was a greater revelation. Moshe was zoicha to even a greater status of Karnei Hoid. Rabbi Say, that is why we celebrate Shavuos as Kabbalas HaTorah, and not Yom Kippur. And that is why, listen very carefully, it's very important. Hakol Moedim B'Atzeres Shebaina Nami Lachem. Everyone agrees on Shavuos, we have to celebrate physically. And on Yom Kippur, nobody's allowed to eat anything. You know why? Because Yom Kippur is a day for God only, not for us. If it's only for God, God doesn't need any food. God is good without the food. So on Yom Kippur, it's only a day of God's agreement. We don't need anything. Shavuos is our agreement. That's why Hakol Moedim Ba'atzeres Ba'ina Nami Lachem Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.